afternoon, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sujeev, Shakya, Chair of Nepal Economic Forum, a Nepal's private sector-led thought center. Welcome to yet another edition of NEFtalk. Today we are here to discuss the gig economy and ride-hailing towards employment generation. We are going to talk about boosting tourism, strengthening SMEs, and generating employment opportunities. We thought of this topic as BEAD was just completing the 5-year strategic plan for Nepal Tourism Board, and as we were traveling and we saw the potentials that could be there if ride-hailing would go throughout the country, SME ecosystem would grow, if delivery services would go throughout the country. So that, and along with that, we were also doing some piece of work in Europe. We are traveling across 8 countries, a piece of work we are doing with the European Union on Nepali migration to Europe. And in that, we saw that Nepalis were engaged in ride-hailing services, they were engaged in delivery services, and we were trying to link about how they do learn all this in Nepal and then get to practice even in Europe. So we have also been working on various pieces of the SME ecosystem, and we have seen how delivery services have contributed to this ecosystem. We saw not only employment that has been created in the Kathmandu Valley and few urban centers, but we have seen the potential of employment opportunities if these services were to go pan-Nepal. We see that the potential is significant, but the key challenge now is to build a balanced and enabling policy environment that allows the sector to grow sustainably while ensuring the safety, protection, and inclusion of the workers who power it. This means moving beyond ad hoc regulation and towards a coherent national framework that recognizes the gig economy as a legitimate and growing part of Nepal's economic landscape. We feel that if Nepal can get this right, ride-hailing and the broader platform economy could serve as a meaningful bridge between where the economy is today and the inclusive, employment-generating future it is working toward. There's a policy brief that we have prepared, so you can pick up a physical copy, or you can just download it by scanning the QR code out there. Also, we have, this is a new, this industry in Nepal is just 10 years old, so there are so many words that have been used: ride-hailing, platform economy, channel partners. So we have something called NEFtalk, where we put words and their meanings, so that helps us to helps people to understand. That's also our effort to to explain the meaning of words and help people understand Nepal economy. So today's program is being divided into 3 parts. As we said, there will be the context setting. So we have Rajesh Shrestha, NEF board member, and Rajesh Maskey, chair of eDrive, who will set the context. And then there will be conversations. So I'll be moderating a stellar panel comprising of Aanchal Kunwar, CEO of Daraz, Jasmine Rajbhandary, senior social protection specialist at the World Bank, and Semanta Dahal, lawyer and chair of Purak Asia. We will conclude with closing remarks from Purak, member of the National Planning Commission. I would leave you with a video that encapsulates the work of Nepal Economic Forum, and then Rojesh will come and make the presentation.
Thank you, Sujeev, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm pleased to present the key findings from the NEF policy brief on gig economy and ride-hailing towards employment generation. The objective of this policy brief is to examine how the gig economy, which is spearheaded by ride-hailing delivery platforms, which is contributing towards employment generation, tourism growth, and SME development in Nepal, and also to understand some of the policy challenges on the ground. What's there on the ground which is restricting the growth of the sector, and also to examine some of the measures, policy measures that will be required to unleash the potential of this sector. So let me start with the context of this policy brief. Nepal today stands with 2 realities. On the first, as we all know that there are limited employment opportunities in Nepal. And every year, more than 750,000 Nepalis are leaving for foreign employment. And especially after COVID, this has been going up. And this fiscal year, the remittances from foreign employment, the formal remittances is likely to cross $16 billion, which is going to be about 36% of our GDP. Whereas, on the other hand, the tourism sector is showing some growth potential. Last year, we welcomed almost 1.15 million international tourists by air, and maybe equally same amount of tourists via road. Likewise, the sector is supporting almost 1.25 million jobs. So the two realities indicate that Nepal has substantial economic potential, but not enough domestic mechanisms to fully capture it. So the two realities raise an important question. How can Nepal create more jobs and economic opportunities in Nepal? And the emerging answer is Nepal's growing gig economy, which is spearheaded by ride-hailing, delivery, and platform-based services. It's estimated that it's contributing about 7% to the national GDP, and it has grown by about 67% in the last 5 years. And directly, it's supporting more than 300,000 jobs across Nepal, and a similar number of livelihoods supported across Nepal. And there are almost 25 plus ride-hailing and delivery platforms currently operating in Nepal. So this gives a picture of how the gig economy has grown over the years. And the growth of the ride-hailing and delivery platforms is not simply a transportation story now. It is increasingly becoming an economic development story. In the next 3 slides, I'll be briefly highlighting the 3 key areas where the gig economy's impact or the contribution is highly visible. The first one is the ride-hailing amplifies tourism economic multiplier. In any economy, tourism creates values only when visitors can move easily and spend across local economies. And in Nepal, fortunately, platforms like Yango, eDrive, and Pathao have become an important part of Nepal's tourism infrastructure by providing safe, transparent, and app-based transport. And what it has done is, because of the reliable mobility, it has helped both domestic and international visitors to visit more destinations, to stay longer, and also to increase local spending. Thus, like ride-hailing does not just transport tourists, it multiplies tourism's economic impact. A useful example, regional example, is Vietnam. Vietnam ride-hailing market is likely to reach $2.16 billion by 2029. And how the ride-hailing has transformed Vietnam's tourism by removing the language barriers and navigation barriers. So as Nepal, we target to welcome 3.5 million international tourists by 2032. There is a huge potential on how our ride-hailing and delivery platforms can provide this opportunity and also to create economic activities out of that. The second one is the delivery services are driving Nepal SME ecosystem. As we know that Nepal SME contribute about 22% to the national GDP. However, many SMEs faces access to market and weak logistics system. However, over the past 10 years, our delivery platforms have been helping our SMEs to overcome these challenges. For example, Foodmandu, which is a food delivery platform, it has served over 270,000 customers over the past couple of years. Likewise, Upaya City Cargo, which is a logistics service provider, it has more than 10,000 delivery partners with them. And also, they have already successfully delivered more than 500 million orders. So it just signifies the importance of these delivery platforms and how they have been supporting SMEs across Nepal. So there are 4 areas, how these digital delivery service platforms are helping these SMEs in terms of market access, in terms of formalization of SMEs, because most of the SMEs are informal in nature. They're helping them to adopt digital technology, digital payments, and also formalizing them, which is also helping them to access credit and be more formal. Likewise, logistic infrastructure is very important. They have helped businesses, to build a strong supply chain, which is very essential for SMEs. Also, it is helping on inclusive entrepreneurship, which is creating income opportunities for women, youth, and persons with disabilities with low entry barriers. Thirdly, the gig economy is also helping to build skills, expanding opportunities through gig work. So as we know that the Nepal migration crisis is driven by limited economic opportunities at home and not lack of ambition, right? How the gig economy has helped over the years, it has helped to rise of the gig economy to address these gaps by creating accessible and flexible income opportunities. The impact definitely is in terms of immediate earnings for the youth and for all the workers, which also has helped them to have semi-skilled work experience in terms of digital, customer service, and logistics. And it has helped to circulate the income within the economy, unlike remittances, which is coming out from Nepal. So it has also some global relevance. Skill gained in Nepal are highly valued in labor market abroad, particularly in the Gulf corridor and in Europe. As Sujeev mentioned earlier, we were in Bucharest, Romania, for the EU migration study. And in Bucharest, we found hundreds and thousands of Nepalis who are engaged with delivery platforms. And when we had discussion with them, we came to know that most of them were initially also driving in Nepal, and that's just how landed up in those jobs in Romania. Likewise, we also saw so many Nepali drivers in Malta, where they were engaged with ride-hailing apps like Uber. And it signifies that how the skills that they learn in Nepal are utilizing in the global market. So it's also providing that opportunity. So we all know that ride-hailing, the gig economy has been supporting the economy in all these three aspects. But definitely to unleash the full potential, there needs to be a right regulatory framework and environment in place. The positive news is that the government of Nepal, a few months back, has already introduced a draft Digital Mobility Service Operation Standard 2026. And through the coming fiscal policy, the government has already announced to introduce 5% VAT and 1% advance income tax on app-based trips, which is signaling towards formalization of the sector. So this development does signify that there's a growing recognition of the gig economy's importance in Nepal. But definitely there are some policy level and regulatory challenges on the ground. There is also emerging sub-national regulation. Since transportation also falls under the jurisdiction of the provincial government, the Gandaki province has already introduced its own ride-hailing regulations 1 year back. And there are some, as I said, this is just a draft proposed regulation at the federal level, but definitely there are some additional compliance layers that these platforms will have to comply with if they need to comply with these provincial platforms, which will even additional burden or operational hurdles for the apps in the province. Therefore, there is some divergence right now, but I think there are rooms to improve on that end. Likewise, there are these 4 areas where we see that some policy discussions requires to be done before finalization of this standard. The first one is the misclassification of platforms. Currently in the draft act, the platforms are classified as traditional transport operators instead of digital intermediaries, exposing them to passengers' liability and other obligations. This is very important at this point because digital platforms are just the intermediaries, so I think that clear distinction is very important. Secondly, there is unclear driver classification in the proposed bill. There is no clear definition of drivers as independent contractors, which creating ambiguity on wages and social security obligations, and reduces flexibility for part-time workers. This is another important aspect that requires further discussions before finalizing the draft standard. Likewise, on commissions and pricing restrictions, the proposed bill has proposed 10% commission cap, which is below the global norms of about 12 to 20%, and restriction on surge pricing and fixed fare structures could directly disrupt market and may reduce marketplace efficiency. So this is also one area, I think, which will require further discussions. The fourth one is the operational burdens. Apart from these, there are different requirements, such as the 30-kilometer distance limit on two-wheelers, mandatory uniforms, data exposing QR codes requirement, local service infrastructure requirement, and government API integration. These are some of the additional operational challenges which are currently outlined not clearly in the draft bill, and the excessive operational requirements could increase compliance costs and deter investments, both domestic and international, and without corresponding benefit to the end users. So finally, to maximize the potential of the ride-hailing and the gig economy, policymakers should consider the following. The first one is to enact an enabling and harmonized regulatory framework. There needs to be some additional exercise with the stakeholders to revise the current bill, to classify platforms as digital intermediaries and a clear distinction between platforms and partner intermediaries, to define drivers as independent contractors, adopt market-determined commission rates, and align federal and provincial rules to reduce fragmentation and compliance burden. The second one is to integrate into tourism and SME ecosystems. As we saw in the case of Vietnam, how the integration of ride-hailing into the Vietnam's tourism ecosystem has helped to excel their tourism. Likewise, I think in Nepal also, we can formally incorporate platforms into airport systems, hotel networks, and tourism channels. And so also while strengthening delivery access and digital integration for SMEs. The third one could be the work around extending skill recognition to gig workers, formally recognize and certifies the skills gained through ride-hailing and delivery work, which includes like navigation, customer service, digital payments, and logistic management. Fourthly, it would be to use platform for tax compliance and formalization. As I said earlier, the government has already going to introduce the taxes. So this is a positive steps. So, government needs to work with the platforms as digital agents, tax agents, to calculate, withhold, and remit taxes for gig workers, and bringing the informal sector into the fiscal system efficiently at a very minimal administrative cost. And finally is to build evidence system for the platform economy. So what we can do is to develop a structured, anonymized data sharing platforms to generate periodic aggregated insights on jobs, income, and digital economic activity, because currently we don't have adequate evidence in terms of data because the figures that I introduced earlier was mostly the estimated figures. So I think this is one area also government needs to work around with the platforms for evidence-based policymaking, and this should not be for individual tracking or surveillance. So in conclusion, Nepal's gig economy presents a major opportunity for jobs, tourism, and SME growth, but realizing its full potential depends on a balanced and enabling regulatory framework to ensure sustainable and inclusive growth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rojesh. So this is a summary of what the policy brief has. So please do pick up a copy of the policy brief, and we will continue. Nepal Economic Forum is going to continue working on this and also with opportunities, work with the different ride-hailing platforms and the government to realize to get over some of the regulatory barriers. Now, may I call upon Rajesh Maskey, Chair of eDrive, to give some context from the industry. He is going to speak in Nepali, but the slides are going to be in English, and I will come back to translate.
Thank you, Sujeev sir. Namaskar. आदरणीय विशिष्ट अतिथिहरू, नीति निर्माता, उद्योगका साथीहरू र यहाँ उपस्थित सम्पूर्ण महानुभावहरूलाई मेरो हार्दिक नमस्कार। आज म यहाँ एउटा कम्पनीको बारेमा मात्र कुरा गर्न आएको होइन, म एउटा यात्राको बारेमा कुरा गर्न आएको हुँ। एउटा यस्तो यात्राको जसको सुरुवात एउटा साधारण प्रश्नबाट भएको थियो। यो 2078 सालतिरको कुरो हो। त्यो बेला हामीले एउटा कुरा धेरै नजिकबाट देखिरहेका थियौँ। हाम्रो वरिपरिका साथीहरू, भाइ बहिनीहरू, चिने जानेका युवाहरू सबैजना विदेश जाने तयारीमा थिए। गाउँबाट शहर, शहरबाट विदेश, जस्तो कि त्यो नै एउटा मात्र बाटो हो गरी खाने। त्यो बेला हामीले आफैलाई एउटा प्रश्न सोध्यौँ कि नेपालमै अवसर सिर्जना गर्न सकिँदैन? के प्रविधिको प्रयोग गरेर रोजगारी बनाउन सकिँदैन? के युवाहरूलाई स्वदेशमै बसेर कमाउने अवसर दिन सकिँदैन? यो प्रश्नको उत्तर खोज्दै गर्दा eDrive नेपालको सुरुवात भएको हो। हामीले सुरुदेखि नै एउटा निर्णय गरेका थियौँ। हामी अर्को एउटा साधारण राइड हेलिङ एप बनाउन चाहँदैनथ्यौँ। हामी नेपालका लागि केही फरक गर्न चाहन्थ्यौँ। त्यसैले हाम्रो सुरुवातदेखिकै नारा थियो गो ग्रिन। हामीले यातायातको भविष्यलाई इलेक्ट्रिकसँग जोडेर हेर्यौँ। हामीले विश्वास गर्यौँ कि नेपालले अरू देशहरूले गरेको गल्ती दोहोऱ्याउनु पर्दैन। हामी सधैँ सिधै हरित र दिगो यातायाततर्फ जान सक्छौँ। त्यसै सोचका साथ 2023 मा काठमाडौँबाट eDrive नेपालको सुरुवात भयो। हाम्रो यो eDrive कसरी स्थापना भयो भनेर मैले एउटा सानो जानकारी गराउन चाहे। धेरैले हामीलाई सोध्नुभयो किन इलेक्ट्रिक? हाम्रो उत्तर सधैँ एउटै थियो, किनभने इलेक्ट्रिक सवारी भनेको केवल गाडी परिवर्तन गर्नु होइन, यो सोच परिवर्तन गर्नु हो। जब पेट्रोल प्रयोग हुन्छ पैसा विदेश बाहिर जान्छ, जब बिजुली प्रयोग हुन्छ तो पैसा नेपालभित्रै घुम्छ, जब चालकले इभी चलाउँछन् उनको दैनिक खर्च कम हुन्छ, खर्च कम भए पनि आम्दानी बढ्छ, अनि जब हजारौं इभी सडकमा चल्छन् सहर पनि सफा बन्छ। त्यसैले हाम्रो लागि इभी भनेको केवल वातावरणको कुरो होइन, यो अर्थतन्त्र, रोजगारी र भविष्यको कुरो पनि हो। काठमाडौँबाट सुरु भएको यो यात्रा बिस्तारै अरू प्रदेशसम्म पुग्न थाल्यो। गण्डकी पुग्यौँ, लुम्बिनी पुग्यौँ, नेपालगञ्ज पुग्यौँ, अब कोशी, मध्य प्रदेश, चितवनमा विस्तारको तयारी भइरहेको छ। तर म सधैँ एउटा कुरा भन्नु सक्छु, हाम्रो उपलब्धि नयाँ सहरमा पुग्नु होइन, हाम्रो उपलब्धि त्यो यात्रामा सिर्जना भएका अवसरहरू हुन्। हामीले सुरुदेखि एउटा लक्ष्य राखेका छौँ, कम्तीमा 1000 जनालाई स्वरोजगार अवसर दिने। आज सयौं मानिसहरू eDrive मार्फत कमाइरहेका छन्, कसैले रेन्टल मोडलमा गाडी चलाइरहेका छन्, कसैले न्यून डाउन पेमेन्ट आफ्नै स्कुटर लिएर चलाइरहेका छन्, कसैले तलब आधारित मोडलमा काम गरिरहेका छन्। तर मोडल जे भए पनि हाम्रो उद्देश्य एउटै हो, मानिसलाई अवसर दिने। जब हामी उद्घाटन गर्छौँ त्यो केवल रिबन काट्ने कार्यक्रम होइन, जब हामी एउटा स्कुटर हस्तान्तरण गर्छौँ त्यो केवल एउटा सवारी साधन होइन, जब हामी हेलमेट दिन्छौँ त्यो केवल सुरक्षा सामग्री होइन, त्यसको पछाडि एउटा परिवार हुन्छ, एउटा सपना हुन्छ, एउटा आम्दानीको स्रोत हुन्छ। मलाई लाग्छ हामीले गरेका सबैभन्दा सुन्दर कामहरूमध्ये एउटा भनेको यही हो। हामीले केही युवाहरूलाई नेपालमा बसेर कमाउन सकिन्छ भन्ने विश्वास दिलाउन सकेका छौँ। आज पनि मलाई केही चालकहरूको कथा सम्झना आउँछ। कोही विदेश जाने तयारीमा थिए, आज काठमाडौँमै रमाइरहेका छन्। कोही एउटा रेन्टल गाडीबाट सुरु गरेका थिए, आज दोस्रो गाडी थपिसकेका छन्। कोही पहिले दैनिक खर्च चलाउन सङ्घर्ष गरिरहेका थिए, आज परिवारको जीवनस्तर सुधारिएको छ। यी तथ्याङ्कभन्दा ठुलो उपलब्धि हो, किनभने अन्तिममा व्यवसाय भनेको मानिसहरूको जीवनमा ल्याएको परिवर्तन हो। तर यो यात्रा सजिलो थिएन। हामीले जब सुरुवात गऱ्यौँ तब हाम्रो यो यात्रा सजिलो थिएन। सायद हाम्रो सबैभन्दा ठुलो चुनौती बजार थिएन, ग्राहक थिएनन्, प्रविधि थिएन। हाम्रो सबैभन्दा ठुलो चुनौती अनिश्चितता थियो। रातो नम्बर प्लेट चलाउन पाइन्छ कि पाइँदैन, फ्लिट चलाउन पाइन्छ कि पाइँदैन, कुन कानुन लागू हुन्छ, कुन निकाय जिम्मेवार हो, यी प्रश्नहरूको स्पष्ट उत्तर धेरै समयसम्म थिएन। व्यवसाय चलाउन सकिन्छ, तर अनिश्चिततामा बसेर भविष्यको योजना बनाउन धेरै गाह्रो हुन्छ। आज राइड हेलिङ केवल एउटा एपको रूपमा हेर्नु हुँदैन, यो रोजगारी सिर्जना गर्ने प्लेटफर्म हो। कसैलाई दोस्रो आम्दानी दिन्छ, कसैलाई पूर्णकालीन रोजगारी दिन्छ, कसैलाई व्यवसाय बढ्ने अवसर दिन्छ र इभी अपनाउन पनि मद्दत गर्छ। आजको डिजिटल अर्थतन्त्रको एउटा महत्त्वपूर्ण हिस्सा बनिसकेको छ राइड हेलिङ। आज नीति बनाउने क्रममा हामी 3वटा कुरा मात्र अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छौँ। नीति निर्माण हुँदैछ, अब धेरै समयपछि हामी त अब यो इन्भेस्ट गऱ्यौँ, हामीलाई डर लागिरहेको थियो के हुन्छ कसो हुन्छ। अब अहिले चाहिँ नीति निर्माण बन्ने अन्तिम यो अवसर आइसकेको छ। यसमा हामीले 3वटा कुरा मात्रै अनुरोध गर्न चाह्यौँ यो कुरामा। पहिलो भनेको स्पष्टता, सबैले एउटै नियम बुझ्ने गरी स्पष्ट नीति चाहिन्छ। दोस्रो स्वस्थ प्रतिस्पर्धा, प्रतिस्पर्धाले नै सेवा राम्रो बनाउँछ, प्रविधि सुधार्छ, ग्राहकलाई फाइदा पुर्याउँछ। हामीले कसैलाई एउटालाई मात्रै चलाउन दियौँ भने त्यसले चाहिँ बजार बिगार्छ भन्ने लाग्छ मलाई। प्रतिस्पर्धा हुनुपर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ। तेस्रो समावेशी नीति, प्लेटफर्म कम्पनीहरू, फ्लिट अपरेटरहरू, व्यक्तिगत चालकहरू, इभी उद्यमीहरू सबैलाई समेट्ने गरी नीति आवश्यक छ। यी 3वटा कुरा मात्रै भयो भने पनि सरकारले यी 3वटा कुरालाई ध्यान दिनुभयो भने पक्कै पनि राइड हेलिङले यहाँनिर जुन रूपमा इन्भेस्ट गरिरहेको छ यो खेर जाँदैन जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई। मलाई विश्वास छ नेपालसँग दक्षिण एसियाकै उत्कृष्ट इभी इकोसिस्टम बन्ने सम्भावना छ। हामीसँग जलविद्युत छ, हामीसँग युवा जनशक्ति छ, हामीसँग उद्यमशीलता छ, हामीसँग बजार पनि छ। हामीलाई आवश्यक छ सही नीति र सही वातावरण। अन्त्यमा म एउटा कुरा भन्न चाहन्छु, eDrive नेपाल हाम्रो लागि केवल एउटा व्यवसाय होइन, यो एउटा सपना हो। नेपालमै अवसर सिर्जना गर्ने सपना, युवाहरूलाई रोजगार दिने सपना, हरित भविष्य निर्माण गर्ने सपना र नेपाललाई अझ अगाडि बढाउने सपना। हामीले यात्रा सुरु गरिसकेका छौँ, अझ धेरै बाटो बाँकी छ, तर हामी विश्वस्त छौँ यदि सरकार, निजी क्षेत्र, चालक साथीहरू, लगानीकर्ता र नागरिक सबै मिलेर अगाडि बढ्यौँ भने नेपालले मोबिलिटी क्षेत्रमा एउटा नयाँ उदाहरण स्थापित गर्न सक्छ। र हामी धेरैले त यहाँ सुन्नु पनि भएको छैन होला eDrive नेपाल भन्ने पनि कुनै राइड हेलिङ कम्पनी छ भनेर, तर हामीले यो लुम्बिनीहरूमा पिङ्क कलरको ट्याक्सीहरू चलाइरहेको छौँ र यहाँ स्कुटरहरू पनि छ। 1000 स्वरोजगार योजना अन्तर्गतका स्कुटरहरू पनि चलाएको छौँ र सबै हाम्रो पहिलो प्राथमिकता इभी नै छ, इलेक्ट्रिकमै हामीले फोकस गरेका छौँ। र हामी जस्तो कम्पनीलाई राइड हेलिङको विषयमा यत्रो यो एउटा प्लेटफर्ममा बोल्ने अवसर दिनुभएकोमा यो जुन नेपाल इकोनोमिक फोरम छ उहाँ लगायत सम्पूर्ण महानुभावहरूलाई धन्यवाद दिन्छु। र eDrive म साथसाथै म जस्तै नेपालमै केही अवसरहरू सिर्जना गर्नु सकिन्छ, नेपालमै केही गर्नु सकिन्छ भनेर मुडे बलले लागेका हामी साथीहरूलाई जुन हौसला प्रदान गर्नुभएको छ त्यसको लागि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद। थ्याङ्क यू भेरी मच।
Thank you very much, Rajesh Maskey. You know, when people ask me, why do you stay in Nepal? And, you know, I think this is why I stay in Nepal, that we hear stories of entrepreneurs, people who are doing, and think when we were starting this policy brief and we said we need to get a local voice to to get experiences and to learn about experiences. And we were introduced to eDrive, and thank you very much for sharing your journey. And as he said, I think it was a very nice presentation where people who could not follow Nepali language could get the sense from the slides that were there. Thank you very much for the team that worked at eDrive to make these slides. And so yeah, definitely it's not a journey of a company, but of a sector. And we've seen how these partners have been able to also excite international firms. We've seen the recent entry of Uber. And when Uber enters, it does not enter when the markets are not mature. When it enters, you know, they know there is a market. I know Amir Thapa is smiling at the back from AmCham. So yeah, so now we go on to the next stage of discussion, where I would call on the panelists on stage that we will be moderating. Aanchal Kunwar, CEO of Daraz, Jasmine Rajbhandary, Senior Social Protection Specialist at the World Bank, and Semanta Dahal, lawyer and chair of Purak Asia. So we heard the context, Rojesh and Rajesh Maskey did put together the context, and now we are going to move in to a panel discussion. So we will have over 30 minutes, and we have a timer out there. Maybe 3 rounds of discussion. We would hopefully get about 10 minutes from the floor. So when we were trying to curate this panel, and we said, who should we bring in? And we were looking at, then we said, okay, this Aanchal, who has been now on our way out at Daraz, but somebody who's worked very closely with ride-hailing for delivery companies, and also as a e-commerce platform, got that experience. And we also wanted to bring in a dimension around social protection, because this is something, Numan is here, ILO is looking at ride-hailing. There's on gig workers, there's a convention, that ILO convention is coming up. And we said that for jobs and growth, there is a perspective to look at how does the issue around the jobs and growth program at the World Bank and the areas around social protection come in. So we just brought in Jasmine. And of course, Semanta has been working on a lot of projects on behalf of the government, and also to look at regulatory framework. And also we have had the opportunity of collaborating with Purak Asia on many other fronts, and we said, okay, let's get in Semanta. So the first round, I would say, would be that a quick introduction of how you yourself and how do you connect with the topic on the gig economy and ride-hailing. Yeah, over to you, Aanchal.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the managing director of Daraz. For those of you who don't know Daraz, it's an e-commerce company. It's a leading e-commerce platform in Nepal. And we do anywhere from 20,000 orders per day to over 100,000 orders per day, depending on how the traffic flows in, whether it's campaign season or not. And primarily when it comes to gig economy, there's probably two different segments that I would relate to from Daraz's perspective. One is from the delivery side. Obviously, with the number of packages that we do have in-house full-time employees who do deliveries, as well as during the surges, we will need to rely on external partners as well as more flexible riders who can come in and help out during the peaks. The second segment is actually the affiliates program that we have. It's more on the marketing front. So it's basically influencers who sign up with us to do some videos or whatever for different products, and then they get paid based on the sales that happens with direct link from their videos. So these are the two segments that would be prominent from a gig economy perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Aanchal. Yeah.
Good afternoon. It's very difficult to follow Aanchalji because she has such concrete experience, but let me try. So I'm with the World Bank. I work on social protection, on labor, on employment. I've been with the bank about 17 years, and I must say, on this question of how do I relate to the topic, the first thing that popped into my mind was fascination. And I think that's why a lot of us are here today. This is such a new topic and has so many opportunities that for each of us, I think there's a learning happening. I think the first two presentations, again, fantastic learning. And also this idea that Sujeevji mentioned in the beginning is raising a lot of questions in my mind as well. So from an economic growth point of view, question, is this a sector that really can contribute to Nepal's economy? We had some fantastic examples, but it raises this question. I think the second question it raises is, all the enterprises that are growing in Nepal, and we know a lot of them are not formal. What does this mean if you're an informal rider? So a second part of it. And I think the third part of it to me is really thinking around who are these young people who are taking on these opportunities? What does it mean for them and their families? And what kind of job quality do they have? Is it something that in a year they get dropped out of because business goes down? So a lot of questions I think were raised in my mind. So for me, being here today is really an opportunity also to learn, but also rethink some of what we've been thinking about in the bank in terms of economic growth and job creation.
Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine. Semanta?
First off, thanks for letting me join this gig today. I know it's not a rock concert, but I think I believe this discussion today could make it to the Billboard charts at least. Thank you very much. First of all, let me answer this, how this topic intersects into my daily life and legal practice. As many of us in this room, this topic intersects with us because we use ride-hailing services on a very daily level. So that's the same reason I think this topic touches me. Second of professionally, how this topic touches me, I think let's answer that. My involvement goes back several years ago when the ride-hailing companies faced their first legal existential crisis in Nepal. The Taxi Driver Association filed a case at the High Court of Patan seeking a remedy saying that the ride-sharing platforms like Pathao and Tutal needs to be barred from providing services. And our legal team and different other lawyers joined together to defend that case, and we were able to allow the Tutal and Pathao to continue to provide the services. So that's my connection there. And also, after that, we were also approached by the Bagmati province to draft a regulation for the ride-hailing services within the Bagmati provinces. We did submit our preliminary draft, but I think the draft is still under discussion. They have not been able to release the draft, but it's been a number of years. So from a consumer standpoint and a legal practice standpoint, this topic intersects at a daily level with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a good way to contextualize where the three speakers are coming from, and that helps us to understand the discussions that is going to follow. So, Aanchal, you've been, you've looked at this whole, the sector changing over the years, and because we need to also understand that this has just been what ride-hailing began 2017-18, very recent, and you came into Daraz a couple of, 4.5 years. So how have you seen this evolving over a period of time, and what are some of the significant changes that you have seen in this sector?
At Daraz, we have around 24,000 sellers who actively participate in selling their products on our platform. 85% of them are SMEs. So over the course of 4.5 years that I've been here, I've seen a transition from these sellers being able to sell through Daraz, connecting to our wide network of 108 whatever cities that we operate in, to now also doing the same through their social media platforms as well. And that's another area that we saw a gap in terms of even the SMEs actually have one set of sales through Daraz, one set of sales maybe through Instagram, one set of sales through another website that they might have. So we realized that that's another segment that's that's a problem for them in terms of figuring out deliveries and all of that, because for small businesses it becomes a nightmare to manage all of that separately with separate partners. So starting last year, we actually also started doing packages for sellers who are doing businesses outside of Daraz. So that's another transition that I've seen most recently, where specifically around deliveries, this is where we're able to help, and this is where we've also partnered with obviously Upaya. I think Suman is here somewhere. Has always been our partner in terms of figuring out deliveries, especially during the surge time, as well as delivery to a lot of areas that we may not have access. So just for some perspective, I know I've shared this before, but almost 50% of our orders actually come from outside of Kathmandu. It's a pretty common misconception that most of the orders are from Kathmandu. It's actually not the case. So for those instances, you also rely on different partners. And there's also some instances where I remember it was 6/6, so June 6th of last year, we had this big campaign. It was so crazy that our app couldn't handle it. That was the level of hype that we were able to create, thankfully. But then that also meant how are we gonna deliver all these packages? It became a nightmare because every month you go through the planning, and based on that planning, you hire a set number of individuals, and we couldn't fulfill the demand at the time. So for a short time, we actually partnered with Patao to figure out, the point-to-point drop-off. So I think these are the instances that I see are going to be more and more prominent in the coming days as well, in terms of changes.
Yeah. So quickly before I move on to Jasmine, so I think this is a very valid. I remember when I was moderating a panel with you a couple of years back with World Bank. That's what we saw, is that the growth that is taking place outside Kathmandu, and this is what we saw even in India, the growth what they call outside the tier 1 cities. So what are some of the constraints of sort of the growth outside Kathmandu? Because this is one of the things we also see with tourism, is that ride-hailing is available in the Kathmandu Valley, but outside, as you move outside, there are challenges. So how have you been seeing this?
From an e-commerce perspective, obviously one is infrastructure, right? Like every time there's, some landslide or whatever, then you're not able to deliver on time and things like that. The second is also, for us, it's also aggregating all of the packages together and then distributing. It becomes a challenge if you're aggregating in multiple places, so that's what you would call like a sorting center, right? We only have one in Kathmandu because it doesn't make sense to have it everywhere. So then it becomes a logistical challenge if the seller is based somewhere else, because you actually have to bring those products to Kathmandu and then sort and then do deliveries again. So I think that would be the flip side of the problem. But outside of that, in terms of delivery to remote areas, it's primarily like infrastructure related, and how many number of orders will you get in a certain neighborhood, right? Like the number of cities that I mentioned, 108, we're planning to grow that to 400 plus by the end of this year. But even then, you wouldn't necessarily cover all of Nepal, because it doesn't make sense then, how much shipping fee are they willing to pay to have it delivered to like the remotest corner? I think that becomes the next big challenge.
Thank you, thank you. I think now I'll move on to Jasmine. So what we are also seeing is that there has been, I think in the presentation also they said there are about 300,000 people that are now associated with ride-hailing. And so this is becoming a big opportunity for job creation and opportunity for the young people. So, World Bank is running a robust growth and jobs program. And where do you see this coming in? So does this would be a way in which employment creation would take place? And of course, there would be some caveats. Would like to share some light on that.
Great. Thank you so much. So you're absolutely right. Our World Bank's country partnership framework really puts jobs and growth at the center of what we're doing in Nepal. So absolutely, for us, it's in a very important area. And I think there, as an example, we've also got a few sectors where we've identified, and that includes tourism, sort of the example that was being shared before, as one of the sectors where there really is potential. We're in the midst of the first stages of a project in Lumbini focusing on tourism sector and really improving tourism. And exactly what we were discussing earlier, there is a big issue around services and the quality of services. So as we're having this discussion, one of the things I think that comes to mind is whichever is the sector, and that is absolutely something here with sort of ride-hailing, is what is the quality of the services and how do we ensure that, right? I mean, as Semanta was saying, I think 99.9% of us have used some sort of delivery, and whether the way the person hands you the package, whether your package is delivered, slightly squashed up, whether they ring the bell or they call you 3 times, the way they speak to you, all of these things do make a difference in terms of the service. So I think one of the things for us is really thinking now about quality of service, not just the service itself being established. That being said, as in some ways, it's not even a sector. It really is an opportunity for so many sectors to grow. And there, we come across a lot of questions about those sectors themselves, right? So if Daraz couldn't grow as an e-commerce, would that second opportunity be there or not? So I think there's a broader question. But I think particularly 3 things that sort of come to mind in this discussion when we're looking at this as an opportunity. So one, very much sort of referring back to the conversation the two of you just had, is how much of this opportunity is limited to urban and peri-urban areas. Given our infrastructure, it is a limitation. So in thinking of the opportunity for, as many of you know, like for the last 3 years, almost 700,000 people are signing up at employment service centers across the country saying, I would like a job. For many of them, this is not an opportunity because it won't be as feasible in a rural area. So I think one question is around who is this opportunity going to be available for? And in that, I think the second thing, and this is true globally as well, when you look at some of the studies done around the gig economy, both sort of the type we're talking about, sort of location-based or more sort of IT platform-based, a lot of the workers tend to be male, less so in the IT part. But I think, we look at Nepal and we think about who are these jobs being created for, right? In Nepal, when you look at youth, 70% of young people who are not in employment, they're not in education, and they're not in training, are females. I have not seen a female delivery person yet, but there may be some. But thinking again how this opportunity could be more inclusive. What are the type of things that would need to happen as opposed to saying it's only an opportunity for men? So I think that's the second area. And I think the third area, Sujeev, as you mentioned, coming from background of working in social protection, is thinking about what type of risks these workers have with them, along with the opportunities that we're recognizing. And some of what Rajesh was mentioning as well, the idea that the company is providing not just the vehicle, but also the helmet, right? These 2 things have to go hand in hand. So really thinking about how we manage the risk, not saying, oh, it's too risky, let's not go there, but really thinking about how those risks can be managed, right? Because as we're saying, if this is really an opportunity for a young person who is staying back instead, whose livelihoods and the livelihoods of their family is now counting on this opportunity, that becomes critical. If they have an accident, if they get sick, it's not just their individual life we're talking about, it's their whole family. So really thinking about those 3. So I think, while we're looking at it as an opportunity, really thinking about the broader economic sectors that we're talking about and how this fits into it, but then also the impact not just on the economy, but in that sense, we can call it the economy of the family as well.
Thank you, Jasmine. So this is very useful. So in terms of we are building on to say that there is opportunity that we have seen and it's going, of course there are challenges also. And to say that, how do we make it more inclusive, to bring in the gender dimension into it? How do we also look at risks, because there are so many risks also associated with it. But I think the government, as Rojesh's presentation mentioned, is trying to accept this as a formal sector. By when it gets taxed, it just gets into more formal. So yeah, we'll come to Semanta in terms of where do you see this, you discussed in your introduction a bit on where the first filing the cases, and where do you see this regulatory landscape moving, and especially one of the challenges we see is the provincial jurisdiction and national jurisdiction. So how do you see this moving ahead?
Thanks. Thank you. When you look at the regulatory landscape, Sujeev, this raises a fundamental debate there. The fundamental debate is, should the law cope up with the technological advancement, or should it choke the technological advancement? I think that's the main fundamental debate that we are facing. The reason I say that is, if you were to ask me even today, strictly speaking from a textual standpoint, whether ride-hailing services are legally barred in Nepal or not, I might have to give an answer which is positive, saying yes. From a strict legal standpoint, textual interpretation, yes, ride-hailing service is still probably barred under the current legal framework. Yet despite that restrictive environment, we can see that the ride-hailing services, ride-hailing apps have grown exponentially, and they have expanded. Why it has expanded is because of the consumer needs, it's because of the market demands, and also fast-paced, fast-moving technology. The law could not cope up with that. Now the laws are trying to scramble. Laws are trying to, now the government is scrambling to frame laws to cope up with this technological advancement. The result is patchwork of, fragmented legals, regulations that different provinces have drafted, and, regulations that the federal government is trying to come up with. So, and in the meantime, with all this was happening, Supreme Court also intervened, stepped in and said, okay, government, you should pass a law that regulates ride-hailing and ride service providers. And after that, then provinces started taking up, and, in their own separate silos, they started preparing their own set of regulations. And then it comes to your question, the interplay between the jurisdiction of federal government and the province government. I think personally for me, I think that contradiction or any conflict there can be managed. The reason I say that is the Constitution gives the federal government authority to maintain authority over national transport policy for federal government, and then the provinces have regulation authority over transport management. So if you read this and harmonize these two, the national government can pass a national transport policy, which could include policies to how to enable ride-hailing or ride-sharing business. And based on that national transport policy on ride-hailing and ride-sharing services, the provinces could pass their own laws and regulation to regulate the service itself of providing that particular ride-hailing and ride-sharing services. So I think that can be managed. The conflict, if any, that could arise could be managed harmoniously. So this is where we're heading also. We're seeing a movement to that direction, because recently, I think Rojesh also spoke in his presentation, the federal government has come up with this digital mobility digital mobility operation guidelines, and that intends to regulate a nationwide, that intends to provide a nationwide framework to see how ride-hailing and ride-sharing services has to be provided. And based on that, the respective provinces could then prepare their own laws to regulate the transport business, especially the ride-sharing and ride-hailing applications. So, that standpoint, I think your question, how this interplay between federal and provincial government, that can be managed, and we are moving ahead in that direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Semanta. So we'll come to the next round, and I think we just put the context and to say that where this is moving. I think there is definitely the government also would want this to, as I said, there's a way to bring this together and move ahead. Because we've also done a bit of a study on the regulation, and we do have some, sort of points that we have noted where some of the amendments would be required. But overall, there is an effort in terms of trying to take this forward. In the next round, one of the things, Aanchal, I would like to ask you would be that in this final round, before we take some questions from the audience, is that as you've been part of an international company here, the way regulatory landscape is moving, how do an international company view this? Because we saw, as we mentioned earlier, Uber coming in. We've seen some other international companies coming in. There are so how would they view this? What are some of the discussions that you are hearing about, sort of Nepal being ready for investments, or these things that are being discussed about?
Yeah, so as an FDI company, obviously, there's a lot of challenges that we run into. So from a policy perspective, as well as an FDI company, for example, as Daraz, we're not allowed to do retail. So that brings in a lot of restrictions in terms of how much of the quality assurance can you do, right? Because we're not able to open the packages. All we can do is the customer places the order, the seller packs the goods, drops it off, and we do the delivery. We don't even have the liberty of opening the package. So it creates a lot of quality issues. And ideally, I know that things like this is in place to ensure that a lot of small businesses don't get killed as a result of big FDIs coming in and doing e-commerce. But I think there should be some midway that you can meet. You can kind of say, like maybe Daraz can do retail, but only have like 50% of their business be retail. The rest, they still need to support the 24,000 sellers or whatever. So I think it creates a little bit of imbalance, and that creates challenges in terms of whether FDIs can continue to invest and grow or not, because I think the growth becomes very limited when you cannot expand beyond a certain point. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is also the conversations are really around we want to focus more on locally produced goods, local companies, and all of these things. But I think there's some sense that we need to put into our thought process when it comes to this as well, because a lot of times you may not be able to produce everything here economically, right? So it may not be the best decision to focus on doing everything locally. So for example, like e-commerce in particular, it takes a lot of investment when it comes to technology. I've worked for Amazon, I've worked for Daraz, which is powered by Alibaba. I know that, even when I was working at Amazon, when we expanded to Australia, for example, first 10 years is unprofitable. So that's the level of funding that's required to keep, the business running. And I think that becomes the biggest challenge of anyone here trying to start that and scale to the same level and give customers the same level of user experience. I know I diverted a little bit from it. But I think, from an FDI perspective, then if you're trying to attract, more FDIs, I think helping ensure that the FDIs who are already here can scale and have flexibility in terms of even bringing in more funds. So I remember in particular, a few years ago when we were trying to expand and we needed more hubs. The project plan that we submitted was we needed 25 or so, hubs and stations, and we were only given 9, for example, for whatever reason. So I think this just creates, more imbalance. And for Daraz or Alibaba in particular, Alibaba purchased Daraz not because they were interested in the Nepal market. They were actually interested in the Pakistan and Bangladesh market, which is so much bigger. We just happen to be in the Daraz's portfolio, and they have a presence here. I don't think this market is big enough for them to worry about am I going to be able to continue or not? If the regulations don't change, at some point it's easier for them to just divest and leave. So I think this is something that the policymakers should really keep in mind as they're making decisions around FDIs.
Thank you. Because I'm bringing this element because as we see this as the ride-hailing markets would grow, the delivery markets would grow, that will bring in more international firms. So we have to have a different mindset in terms of the regulation of it. And also, I think one of the things that Jasmine also talked about in terms of the service, in terms of ensuring quality, and we've seen that the global quality standards that big firms bring in, that helps even also to ensure that there are no fly-by-night operators that come in and say that, okay, I'm operating this, and then actually kill the sector. We have seen that also happen in Nepal. So I think this intervention was useful because as we move in, there's a policy paradigm, not only about the ride-hailing, but there's a policy paradigm around bringing in international technology, international investments. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think in terms of the government's perspective, anything e-business actually makes it much more easier to monitor and implement whatever changes that you're trying to make, right? Whether it be from a tax perspective, whether it be from like a review perspective. So for example, like the drug administration uses Daraz to kind of vet like what is being posted. And if a seller is just selling out in, like offline, you wouldn't be able to find that, but it's easier to find on Daraz. Same goes with like pricing variations, the MRP regulations that we're trying to implement. It's easier to see on Daraz and like, all of the other e-businesses. I mean, if the goal is to move to a more green economy, because like even if, a seller is selling through social commerce, then you don't have a way of tracking it. I know a lot of sellers still take, funds from to their personal accounts. So there's no way to trace that. But as an FDI company, we only work with, PAN and VAT registered sellers who do, thorough paperwork and all of that. So I think these are the things that also are helpful across e-businesses.
Thank you. So just to move on, now we are talking about regulation, bringing in, international businesses, FDI, we are linking those pieces. So what are some of the work that World Bank is doing in terms of helping, assisting in this regulatory space? And where do you see some of the interventions that the World Bank is going to be making?
Thanks. I think I'll also diverge a little bit first, because a lot of what we were seeing in the presentation around regulations is very focused. And I think that part is also critical, right? While not in Nepal, globally the bank has also done a lot of work looking at gig economy and regulations. And what I'm seeing here today in the presentation and what we see in these sort of global documents are very similar. So really worth looking at some of that. And there I think the basic part really starts with this definition. But it's really looking at from the perspective of the enterprise and from the perspective of this individual, whether we call them self-employed or employer-employee, that is not even clear in our conversation today. And because of that, that then is not clear what their responsibilities are, what their rights are. So I think that it's very important to think about this definition, first of all, when we go into regulation. I think linked to that, and obviously, ILO, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, a new convention has come out that actually focuses on gig economy. And that provides a lot of global agreement and expertise in terms of what the regulations in Nepal could look at as well. So I think there's another source that would be very useful for Nepal. But I think all of us, when we're looking at this, we really are thinking about similar things. So on wages, if they are not a formal employee, what does it mean is their minimum wage? So these things are all related, right? If they are self-employed, what does that mean about their minimum wage? Is somebody responsible for them? Or are they responsible for registering in the Social Security Fund? And as an informal worker, the local government is responsible for them as well. So I think a lot of this we really need to think through, and we cannot just think about this regulation alone, and we really need to think about it linked to the other policies and discussion that is going on in Nepal. And that includes both the social protection side of things, the employer as a small SME, informal or formal as well. So I think that's part of the story, and I'm just referring back to the earlier presentation. But absolutely, as Aanchal ji was saying, for the bank, this is one tiny subsector in many senses. But when we're looking at overall growth and how there can be changes in Nepal that can help the private sector growth, that can help increase the number of employment opportunities in Nepal, I would say there's three sort of policy areas that we're focusing on. And one of them is really around private sector development and the environment that exists or how, let's say, I don't want to say not exist, but how that could be improved. I think that is a very big part of this story. And as Aanchalji was saying, if that space were to improve, it is not just for this sector, it is for a range of sectors. And we're talking about a range of things, including Public Procurement Act as one example. I think the second sector is really around investment and investment facilitation. If we are talking about money transfers across our national borders, how is that allowed, not allowed, whether you're buying or you're selling? So I think that's another big area that will also be linked back into this as well, especially as international stakeholders or players are coming into the country. And I think the third area that we really need to think about is really what are the limitations or the difficulties in terms of access to assets, which will include land, which would include labor, which would include capital, right? We've talked a little bit about the labor side in terms of skills, right? In some ways, this opportunity that the gig economy provides, especially sort of as riders, I look through the Daraz and I think, Daraz and also Pathao and globally, when you look at the vacancies, you require SLC, right? So other than that, if you have or can access something and have a phone, not even a smartphone, you can get this job. I mean, I'm just saying, in terms of the ads and the vacancies, but what does that mean in terms of the skills? So really thinking about, who is out there and what sort of skills are out there, the labor that is out there for the type of employment we're creating. So I think that's another area that really needs to be looked at. So I think broadly speaking for the bank, those three areas in terms of looking at regulations and policies in Nepal for improvement, and in areas where the bank is working with the government now, I would flag those three areas as the policy areas.
Thank you, Jasmine. So you heard Aanchal and Jasmine. Semanta, what would be some of the thoughts? Because there are quite a few. When we talk about regulation, it's not about regulating, sort of the ride-hailing or the gig economy only, but there are issues relating to FDI. There are issues relating, like for instance, one of the provisions that says that 30% has to be local partner. There are these, various sort of regulations that have been thrown in. And so where do you see this? Where there are some of the linkages that come in terms of sort of a futuristic regulation, just to move on to where you're saying it's a very fast-changing environment also. Yeah.
Thank you. Building on some of the excellent points, I think Rojesh ji and Rajesh ji made similar names. That I'd like to just emphasize on 4 critical areas of policy interventions or policy improvements that are needed. Firstly, I think on a social protection standpoint, I would like to pick up on this word called gig worker. We have been speaking on gig economy, but we also need to talk about gig worker here. The reason is gig workers do not neatly fall either under regular employment bracket. They don't neatly fall under independent contractor also at the same time. Because of this gray area, they are excluded from the labor protection regime that our laws provide. So what we really need to emphasize is there should be some amendments made to the Labor Act, and probably the ILO Convention on Gig Economy that came out just yesterday could be helpful to introduce some provisions that does allow some meaningful protection to gig worker from a labor protection standpoint. So that's the first policy recommendation that I would like to emphasize. Second, probably is this. How do you really approach fair regulations? I mean, the FARE fair here. Should it be rigid, prescriptive, the way the current government of Nepal's digital mobility service operation guidelines has provided, or should we leave it to the market? I think that is something that we need to really consider. I think rather than prescribing the fare in the regulation itself, we should only, the regulations should just state, the aspects and the factor the ride-hailing and ride-sharing companies should consider in determining a fare. And based on that, in the market efficiency will then determine what fare will be applicable. So that is probably a better approach there. Because if you do something like this, it could be, and Sujeev uses this word a lot often, it could be a government carteled fare. That could be, we consumers need to then pay in the end. So that's the second point. Third is something I would like to explain, but I don't think I'll be able to explain this clearly as someone from a technological background. Probably Santoshji is here, and he could help me later on when he makes his intervention also. The third point is we need to distinguish between digital platforms and software providers. The transport platforms
and software providers. And because this distinction is clearly needed, some technology companies just purely build the apps, and then they allow the apps to be licensed by different platform providers to be used, and then it is provided as a software as a service model. Probably Santoshi is going to explain that in better way. And forcing these technology companies who just provide these apps as a software as a service to fall under the strict regulatory framework probably will not help the growth. So I think that's the third point I wanted to make. The fourth point is what you raised earlier regarding this 30% local ownership requirement for ride-hailing and ride-sharing services. And that could be debated. I have my own personal thought on that, and I will stick to that. This provision is introduced to make sure that there is a technological transfer to local partners. But if we see other sectors on where this forced local partnership has been introduced, I think many examples will show that the local partners have used this requirement to take the foreign investors on a ride. Let me just keep it there. So I think probably we need to probably rethink on that provision also at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Semanta. I think those are very crisp recommendations. I think we can add it to our policy brief, what you said. So we'll leave it, we'll have about, I'm looking at the clock, maybe 2 or 3 60 to 90-second interventions from the floor. There will be microphones around, and then we will come for the closing. So please show of hands. There's one hand out here.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, first of all. My name is Priyath, and I'm working in AI logistics systems. My question to you all, I've written it down so I do not waste anyone's time. Aanchal ma'am, you briefly touched on the economic challenges that even a company like Daraz faces in terms of scaling to rural areas and connecting to what we would consider as an already marginalized customer segment. However, sometimes in the international markets and in Nepal as well, we see to it that a market leader, usually VC-backed or a multinational company, takes the economic burden to change consumer behavior, as Daraz has changed the consumer behavior in terms of e-commerce, and ride-hailing apps have changed in terms of logistics. And as Jasmine ma'am also mentioned about how inclusivity is an important topic to touch upon. So I'd love to get your opinion on the role of market leaders in making sure that ride-hailing is accessible pan-Nepal, or should the burden be taken by the government, or rather mom and pop shops who are already economically challenged? And in respect to the policy that we see, the Vietnam case study also has the B group investing billions of dollars prior to making sure that the ride-hailing companies and the logistic ecosystem becomes what it is today. So in terms of that, what do you think market leaders, should the economic burden be taken solely by the market leaders? That question being through Daraz or your last mile delivery partners as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Apurva. I am a labor and employment practitioner from Pioneer Law Associates. My question is to the entire panel. I have 2 recommendations based on my experience representing a lot of formal sector employers and being very much aware of their limitations with regard to keeping foreign direct investment in Nepal. First of all, Nepal already has a social security system that has also opened its accessibility to self-employed workers, which would potentially include the delivery riders we're thinking of today. Would you, what are your thoughts on making enlistment of such kind of riders mandatory at Social Security Fund? Would that be a good intervention? Second, the current Labor Act is very rigid in terms of balancing the need for flexibility that is required by employer side as opposed to the fairness required by the employee side. What is the thought of the panel with regard to introducing a ground for exit of employment relationship, having to prove lack of business growth? So one way of supporting gig workers' access to social protection is bringing them into the Labor Act framework, but to balance that, we also have to inject added flexibility into the framework for employers. And a recommendation that I have is expanding the termination grounds in the Act. I want to all the relevant stakeholders in the stage with regard to these interventions.
Thank you. Thank you. We can take.
Hi everyone, I'm Nobel. I write about politics, memes, and AI. And my question is more on the social protection lens. We keep hearing gig work framed as employment generation, which can be true, but at the same time, it's not really full-time employment. And just when you're measuring social protection outcomes, I kind of want to ask the more difficult question, which is, are we creating jobs or are we formalizing underemployment? And how does that look like in terms of the hours to income data for these gig workers? And how can we avoid this trap of formalizing underemployment and making sure that these are jobs being created?
Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Amrita and I work in the communications space. I'm a comms advisor and strategist. This is more of a topic like a conversation that we can have probably next time or later, but not a question. I did see a slide on focusing on tourism when it comes along with gig economy and ride-hailing apps. There are a lot of on-ground reality that probably has not been presented before. And as somebody who also works in the event space and brings in a lot of mice into Nepal, I recently did one where we brought in over 400 people into the country. There is an issue when it comes to ride-hailing apps, as in people are not able to log into the apps at all because they do not have a local SIM card. And also the other issue is when we're looking at value-based tourism, right? A lot of people are not going to be looking for local SIM cards. They're going to be using their phone on roaming mode and those kind of services because India has made it very easy for people to just activate those. And they do not, first of all, know which ride-hailing apps is available in Nepal, number one. Number two, they cannot log in, so they cannot use it at all, and they end up having to hire cabs via hotels. So I think this is a topic that we should take a look on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Akshita, and I work in the tourism sector as well. So I wanted to ask a question regarding how job healing, like ride hailing, we're talking about how it creates jobs, right? And like Jasmine ma'am just pointed out, a lot of women in Nepal, they're like unemployed, right? And if you're talking about a ride hailing creating employment, of course, women don't have enough opportunities. I want to know, what is the reason for this? Is it like safety? Is it not given to them, this opportunity not provided to them, or does it have to do with social protection? And I want to know what can we do in order to provide this opportunity to women as well? So that's my question.
I kind of feel obliged to take the floor. This is Numan Özcan, I'm ILO Country Director, and I'm very happy to see the labor dimension that's been raised by the floor and also by the panelists. You are very right. Actually, this gig economy, platform economy creates a lot of employment throughout the world, but it's also very prone to decent work deficits in terms of pay, in terms of social protection, working conditions, health and safety issues. That's why only last week ILO adopted a new convention on the decent work in the platform economy. This is the first international treaty dealing with the platform economy and putting international standards in this. So when Nepal is moving to regulate this area, I think this convention also can provide a good definitions and the minimum standards in the employment in this area. So sometimes I like to do small surveys when I take these services, and when I take a taxi, I also ask, and we talk with the drivers asking about their working conditions, and I feel and I see that most of them are working 12, 14 hours a day. This is not good for their health, and this is not good for us as users of the services, and not good for the safety of the whole traffic. So please, when you regulate this area, don't see this as an issue of transport or tourism, and see this also as an issue of workers' rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll do a round of, there are a lot of questions being asked, so hopefully taking down notes. A quick 2 to 3 minutes, we will just have the closing round. Yeah.
I think someone was asking about the economic burden to expand to new market. You were asking that, right? I think as Daraz, you actually have a lot of expenses in terms of, expanding from, I think we were like in 25 whatever cities to now 108, and by the end of this year, we're planning to go to 400 plus. And that's primarily coming from the demand as well. So as I shared earlier, like almost 50% of our orders come from outside Kathmandu, and that's by design, because I think outside Kathmandu, people have less access to different options. So obviously, Daraz becomes the destination of choice as they're ordering more and more. So the economic burden is not just on expansion. The economic burden is actually also on educating the sellers, educating the customers, because for the sellers, this is the first time they're doing e-business, so they don't know how to, put their products, they don't know how to do reviews, sometimes they don't know how to process orders, so it takes a lot of time and effort and investment from the company's perspective to educate the sellers, even from the customer side. To date, the highest number of calls or contacts that we get is, where is my product? And they're calling within the window that we said we would deliver. It's not outside, right? So they don't know how to look at that information either. So I think even on the customer side. So I think from Daraz's perspective or any business's perspective, it's actually better if you have competition, because you share the cost of educating the sellers as well as the customers and making the market more ready. The second question was more around SSF and flexibility for the riders. I think you can probably speak up more, but from Daraz's perspective, it's actually fairly formalized. So we have another partner who hires contract workers, and they all follow the same regulations for the daily wage and all of that. So all of that is covered, but I know it may not be the case for other ride-hailing apps in particular. And then, was it about exit of employment? I think that remains a big problem in Nepal in general. Even with poor performance, it's really hard to penalize people and fire people. We've actually been through a situation where someone did not have, up to par performance. We put them through a performance improvement plan. I mean, what the government requires. Then, they were let go because they were still not performing, and they still, did a case against us, and we had to hire them back and put them in the same role. It's a very painful, I think any corporation is gonna tell you that this is, the most painful thing that we deal with, and I really wish the government is gonna do something about this, because I think, as corporations, we should be able to get rid of people who are not performing well, and this should be a lesson for them as well to, upskill themselves and do better when they go to the next company, or we actually hire people who are actually capable and want to do the hard work.
So I'll start, and maybe I'll try and go through, I think, the three questions that I think I can add a little bit. So I think we need to take a step back, which is part of the regulation storyline. The SSF and the Labor Act came together, and as you were raising, there's a reason they came together, right? But those acts were passed now almost 10 years ago. I think it is time to review it. So I think that is an opportunity as well to also look at both of those in terms of what the modern economy is offering and what modern workers are looking like. So I would say, at a broad level, that's probably very important. And at the same time, across the globe, the contribution rate for SSF in Nepal is like the highest. And that is worth thinking about also in terms of looking at what that means for employers and what it means for their growth. So on that one, maybe I'll stop there. On is gig work employment? I think it's a fantastic question, and I think it's a question that we need to ask not just as people in the room, but Honorable Member Pukar sir is also here. When we're thinking about reducing unemployment in Nepal, what do we mean? Right? A lot of the strategies we see right now are really about, private sector growth is going to take a while. In the meanwhile, people can become entrepreneurs. and you guys are smiling, but the reality of being a successful entrepreneur is very, very difficult. And so counting that as an employment and that somebody's living off, I think is a big challenge for the government. So I think we need to think a little more broadly about what we mean about employment. I think part-time employment, if we're clear that it is part-time employment and it comes with XYZ, is fantastic, because it does offer many people the flexibility, including women, that they may want, that they may need. But I think we do need to break it down and think about that. The third question, I know we're running out of time a bit. I go back to this idea of sort of, can women be part of this fantastic opportunity we're seeing? I mean, if those numbers are right, 300,000 people, that's huge, right? So I think there are many things that can be done, but we need to think about the realities. As a woman, I kind of know how to ride a scooter, but to be honest, putting a strange male behind me is not something I'd be willing to do, right? So I think we need to think about, opportunities, but how they could be balanced. I am sure many women in the room would love to always have a woman driver in front of them. It is an opportunity. Look at how many women are out in the streets, are in employment right now, are involved in enterprises. So there are opportunities like that we can think about. There could be examples where, I've seen this done in many offices for women drivers in cars as well. They don't have the night duty, they have the day duty. So I think there are a lot of opportunities. We just need to think a bit more creatively and have that motivation and the willingness to make that happen. I think there is a lot of scope for that to happen as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll try to respond to questions, very valid questions and points that Apara made. She was also my fellow legal colleague, so I think I should respect that also at the same time. So I think in terms of the response to provide to your questions and the points you raised, first let me address this social contribution-based social security. On that, we need to see that from a right-based angle, So if it is a right that the Constitution has provided, and if you read HLA Hart, I'm sure you know of him, Hart said the rights can be waived. So this entire debate regarding contribution-based social security, whether that's mandatory or voluntary, that's a question that Supreme Court is yet to answer, and the petition is still lying there for a number of years. So let's leave it there with regard to whether you should make it mandatory or voluntary. However, from my personal standpoint, I think gig workers should be brought under the social security safety net, because only then they will be able to get the protection that the labor law really provides to them. So that's my response to that particular point that you raised. Regarding this exit and termination, I think probably the ILO convention yesterday for platform economy that has come out, I think we should reflect on that and see how they have tried to address that particular question, and then probably also amend our labor laws based on that. So that's an option that we have now on the table, because it definitely covers international best practices for gig workers and platform workers. I think those are the two questions that you raised. Thank you very much, and I thoroughly enjoyed this gig, Sujeev.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. A round of applause to our panelists. And I know I kept adding some time because the discussion was so interesting that, at least we are very happy with Nepal Economic Forum. What we try to do is to bring in new perspectives into discourses that has not taken place, and also bring in new discourses. And so this has been something that we saw. There are the social protection dimension of it, there's a regulation dimension of it, and also there's the experience that people like Aanchal, who has been operating companies, an FDI company that is touching many lives, and seeing how the transformation has taken place. So this is a great set of discussions, and we will continue the discussions in the future too. And now we have the final part of the program, and for that we'll have logistically the podium to come up, and we'll extend our program for another 10 minutes, where we're going to have our National Planning Commission member Purak Malla come and deliver the closing remarks.
A very good afternoon to all of you. Namaskar. I just said to Sujeev ji, I may need 15 minutes, not 10. I had thought about 10, but this is such a rich conversation, very timely, and a lot to be done. So I want to begin by thanking the Nepal Economic Forum for creating this platform for a lot of us, young people, experienced people from all different walks of life to come here. And Sujeev ji, you have a very nice way, a sort of a magical way to weave emotion and evidence together to transform economy. Yeah? So those are your 3 E's: emotion, evidence, economy. And that's exactly, I think, that what we saw today. Particularly your story was very moving. I was beginning to feel goosebumps, and then you said "mudebal." It really touched me. I began tearing. So thank you for everything you and so many of entrepreneurs across Nepal are doing. Very touching. About 6 months ago, on my way to the airport, I actually had a conversation with a young driver from Janakpur, Laxman Saha. Right? Laxman drives a hospital vehicle for 10 days a month, and 20 days he's a Patao driver, right? And what he said was his wife also works, and together, monthly basis, they save about 70 to 80,000 rupees per month, right? With quiet confidence, what he said left a profound impact on me. He said, I have neither the desire nor the need to go abroad. मलाई ठ्याक्कै त्यही भन्नुभयो कि उहाँले है अनि त्यो मेरो लागि भनेर एकदमै profound moment हुन गयो कि उहाँको त्यो मेहनत हैन उहाँको त्यो ऊर्जा त्यो उद्यमशीलता देख्दाखेरि यहाँमा पनि मैले राजेश जी त्यही देखेँ धन्यवाद. And then we had such an intelligent conversation right here around evidence. All of you, thank you, Semanta ji, Jasmine ji, Aanchal ji, Rojesh ji, thank you so much. I believe Laxman's story or your story should not remain extraordinary. It should become a normal, right? It should become ordinary in some ways, right? It should become the kind of opportunities that our policies, markets, and our institutions are designed to create. Today's presentations and panel discussion made that possibility very visible. We heard that the gig economy is no longer marginal. Ride-hailing, delivery, freelance services, digital marketplaces, platform-enabled work are already becoming part of Nepal's economic infrastructure. 3 lakh rozgari bhaneko त ठुलै number हो. That's a big number, right? And so, your presentation has really left this indelible mark. So when I go back, I know I have more work to do. I take away 5 core messages from the presentations and the discussion. First, platform work is creating a practical entry point into the labor market. Practical. Right? पहिलो कुरा. And for many young people, the first job may not begin in a formal office. So my 2 daughters may not begin with a formal job in an office or a factory or even civil service. It may begin with a motorcycle, smartphone, license, digital payments. We talked about ride-hailing today, but gig economy can and will mean a lot more into the future. Second, ride-hailing and delivery platforms support broader economy, right? So it's not just about the platforms on which they stand on, or tourists who can move safely and transparently spends more, right? And I think the connection that you made between this platform and tourism sector is quite eye-opening. And for that matter, that connection is, I'm sure, going to unravel in other sectors as well. Third, electric mobility gives Nepal a strategic advantage, right? This is your presentation. As the eDrive presentation put it, petrol leaves, electricity stays. In fact, in this budget, one reason for us to imagine the sovereign AI compute center is exactly this. How can we go from PPA to CPA? How can we go from purchase power parity to compute power parity, right? How can we make use of electricity in Nepal, create a value-added electricity platform, the compute resource, and sell it at 10x the price, right? So that's sort of the imagination, and this works very well. But if I may, just the same way we're thinking about eDrive, I think to build on Jasmine G's point, it would be wonderful to think about WDrive as well. I think that is quite befitting. Fourth, uncertainty is costly, right? Entrepreneurs can take risks, but they can't plan in ambiguity. Workers can work hard, but they need basic protection and clarity. Investors can innovate, but they need predictable rules. Citizens can adopt new services, but they need safety, accountability, and fair pricing. Fifth, Nepal must avoid a false choice between innovation and regulation. We do not have to choose necessarily between a completely unregulated platform economy and a restrictive regime that discourages investment. And I think that's one of the reasons why someone like me is perhaps also now part of the government system, where hopefully we can think about how do we make sure Singha Darbar understands innovations and creates an environment to make use of it, right? So let me connect this discussion to broader government and also the Planning Commission. The 16th plan of put together by the Planning Commission is guided by good governance, social justice, and prosperity. I think these are the topics that we have, talked about, sometimes more directly, and sometimes that was the song beneath the words, right? Our employment challenge is quite clear. Nepal must move from a dependency to domestic opportunity. We must reduce distress-driven migration, raise labor productivity, expand productive employment, and create work that is dignified, skilled, and connected to markets. This is exactly where the gig economy becomes important. It will not solve Nepal's employment challenge alone, but it can become an important bridge from informality to formalization, from cash to digital, from fragmented livelihoods to traceable income, from low-skill work to certifiable skills, and from migration by compulsion to work by choice. And I remember, the first conversation, this was the first week of, this was probably like about 2 months ago when I joined the Planning Commission. The first week, our Honorable Prime Minister invited us, and one of the first things we began with was imagining a Nepal where no youth needs to leave the country because they didn't have a choice, right? So that was where we began, and this conversation really aligns with that. Now, the conversation also connects with how the government is looking at economic reform. Economic reform is not only about announcing new policies, but it's also about creating multipliers, right? So, the size of the budget has been much talked about, right? Is it going to be 18 kharba, 20 kharba, 21 kharba, which is where things are at. But, really how the government is thinking is, the size of the economy, if we're going to target 7%, is 72 kharba, right? About there, right? So if we want to go from 21 kharba to 72 kharba, then that means a multiplier. And that multiplier comes through private sector, but also through governance, right? So if you look at the budget, you'll see a lot of activities in the budget that talk about incentivizing, promoting, supporting private sector. So that multiplier effect comes into play. So that's one thing that we've done. Sometimes, it has been misunderstood, but that is the idea, because the private sector is the one that is going to create the type of jobs that we need, right? Then there is also the governance multiplier, because at the end of the day, an enabling environment is important for even the private sector to create jobs. So this is where we are beginning to think very seriously about how to support the creation of results. So just this morning, the National Planning Commission convened a meeting with all secretaries. The finance minister joined us at the Planning Commission. So Madhu sir is nodding his head. This is unlikely an event where the finance minister comes to the Planning Commission, and the idea was, in addition to talk about, some of our regular activities, to really talk about budget implementation, right? So we had the finance secretary make a presentation about the spirit of the budget. We had the secretaries talk about, how they see how they see the budget, how they are thinking about turning this budget into outcomes. So, we want to see, as the government, how to turn some of our procedures by leveraging governance innovations into progress. And governance is not just government. Governance is really about how the government, the private sector, and the civil society bring together their formal and informal resources together to address public service delivery, right? So why I'm saying this is also because I think this is an invitation to all of you to be a part of the governance process. Now, let me offer 6 policy principles as way forward from this conversation on the technical side. First, clarity. So Nepal needs a coherent national framework for digital mobility and platform work. So that is quite clear. It should clearly distinguish between a digital intermediary, a fleet operator, an individual driver or rider, an employer. So there are a lot here to really think about and ensure clarity, because when there is clarity, it becomes easier to implement. Because it might be clear in the ministry that oversees transportation, but by the time it reaches the Ministry of Labor or the Ministry of Finance, if it's not a clear understanding, it may not lead to the type of results we want. Second is harmonization, and you made the point, in a federal system, provincial and local government has legitimate roles. And so we need to think about how the work that is happening at the federal level, the work that, very gratefully that Gandaki has already spearheaded, how do we bring it together? And what I understand is that the provision as of now is just a draft. It's a draft about to reach a finalization stage, and there's work that we can collectively do. Third, proportionate worker protection. And this was raised by Nobel, right? If I remember your name right, I think I met you, a few weeks ago. Okay. Flexibility is valuable, especially for students, women, part-time workers, returning migrants, and people transitioning between jobs. But flexibility should not mean vulnerability. Workers need practical mechanisms for accident insurance, occupational safety, grievance redress, transparent earning information, fair deactivation rules, and the list goes on. And this is what you are also trying to highlight, Numan. And in fact, the finance minister in his speech has talked about how gig workers and others will be part of SSF, Social Security Fund. So that is something that we've already said. Fourth, skills recognition. A gig worker is not just a rider or just a driver. They're acquiring market-relevant competencies every day. So we talked about certifying these skills. And one of the advantages for the Planning Commission is, in fact, because I also oversee, or I work with the Ministry of Youth, Labor, and Employment, but I also work in my portfolio is Ministry of Industry, and it's not just for me. So I can bring the two sides together, but that's true of what the National Planning Commission can deliver. We can bring in different sectors, so skills recognition seems like something that we need to bring the labor and the industry side together. Fifth, formalization through technology. Platforms can become practical instruments for tax compliance, social protection, credit profiling, insurance, and skills certification. And sixth one is evidence-based regulation, right? Government can really make use of anonymized data or data that NEF and others can create to make decisions. But let me also offer a how, right? I would really request NEF and everyone here to put together, and I just asked Semanta ji as well, the World Bank is here, Aanchal is here, to bring together your thoughts, and please come to the government at the Planning Commission. We are happy to also bring together other relevant actors and think about what this means in terms of influencing a policy decision, right? And I do not know, I'm just 2 months into work, I don't know where Digital Mobility Service Operation Standard is at now, but the sooner the better, because I've been part of these types of conversations, conferences, and we don't see the paper. It doesn't come to us. We go to these activities, but we don't see the papers, and so it'd be great to have your feedback. And if I'm here, I should talk a bit about the Planning Commission, right? So then I'm making good use of the time that the Planning Commission has allowed me to come here. We all know that Nepal has undergone a political renewal, right? And so there is high aspiration in the people about public delivery. And if that's the case, what we need is a new delivery architecture. We need a new governance architecture. So in other words, either the inputs into the black box has to change, or the black box itself has to change, right? And so this is why we had the conversation today at the Planning Commission with all the secretaries, right? To begin to think about how do we do things differently? How do we actually begin to innovate, right? So that was the conversation today. So you will see changes slowly. You're already beginning to see a lot of changes. Sometimes people are getting confused in the last 2 months. But in the way of innovation, you'll also see some changes. The Planning Commission is going to play an important role in thinking about and institutionalizing innovations, both in the way of policy formulation and policy implementation, both on both aspects. Just to give you an example, on the policy formulation side, in the process of creating the budget, we worked very closely with the ministries. So we're trying to figure out a new sort of alignment, a new power alignment between the Planning Commission and the ministries, where, as you probably know, the Planning Commission is thought of as the trusted advisor to the executive, right? And we want to turn that into reality, right? We want to turn our moral authority into policy authority in practice. That's where we are at. And so during this, in the budget, in the policy and program, there's employment policy. There's also care economy promotion policy. There is industrial policy, and there is women enterprise development strategy. These are some that I'm going to work more directly with, some of which relates to this conversation. And the idea is to take an evidence-based approach, bring together multi-sectoral teams with government people who actually put in the hours to understand where we are, what needs to be done, and right. So this is sort of a new approach, a rapid results approach that we want to take so that there is shared clarity across the current silos, right? So we can begin to break the silos and there is a shared understanding. So the finance ministry is in it from the very beginning, and other ministries for that matter. Policy implementation side, there are some programs that are, I think, relevant for us, such as National Enterprise Facility. There is also National Apprentice program. So there are some of these programs that are in the budget, and I think the next 4 weeks are quite timely for us to have, conversations so they can influence the Karyavidi. Because the idea is, how do we begin to make use of this time to, put together the procedures in place so they are all, approved. And Shravan 1, we begin to, utilize the funds. Pus 1, we have a midpoint review, and Chaitra 30, we have a final review so that the learnings influences the next budget cycle. Let me come to a closer, which is needed. Rajesh, again, I come back to you. यहाँले अघि के भन्नुभयो भने हामीसँग त सबै कुरा छ है, हामीसँग त इलेक्ट्रिसिटी पनि छ, त्यत्रो युवा पनि छ हैन, हामीसँग भनेपछि स्रोत पनि छ, युवा पनि छ, उद्यमशीलता पनि छ, नभएको मात्र के कुरा भन्दा पोलिसी भन्नुभयो के हैन। अनि म त एउटा मात्रै मान्छे रहेछु यहाँ है, पोलिसी सेक्टरलाई सम्हाट हुन त मधु सर हुनुहुन्छ, अरूहरू पनि हुनुहुन्छ होला यहाँ। So if that's the case, then let's work together on this. I mean, if it's a topic that is becoming so important to such big population of youth, and it's creating jobs, I think let's talk about how do we bring gender into this? How do we make this more sustainable, this conversation more sustainable? And policy ko kaam ta त्यही नै हो. So the National Planning Commission is committed to working with you all, and we very honestly invite you for an honest conversation to work together on policy. Thank you so much for this time. Dhanyavad.
Thank you, Purak. I think what we tried to do was, this was our first attempt also with the new government to see that we can do these policy dialogues. And thank you very much for coming. There's a lot that's happening in your office, but you could spare time to listen to today's discussion and also for your closing remarks. Thank you very much. And we are going to take up your offer. We do have some amendments that we think in the legislation, the mobility regulations that are required. I know Semanta has been doing a lot of work, and I think we can put together industry folks and others, and we'll be more than happy to share the research we've done, share the work we have done, the analysis we have done over the years, and to say that what could be a policy paradigm that could come in. So finally we come to the end of today, and thank you our panelists, Aanchal, Jasmine, and Semanta, thank you very much, and the context setters, Rojesh and Rajesh, thank you very much. And do stay tuned for our next events coming up. So we have one on July 8th on migration and remittances with the European Union, and then we are going to release our 2-year long study on Nepal and China, opportunities that would be later in July, that's coming in. But before we end, a round of applause for all the people who work at the back of the scene. I know there are a lot of people behind the scenes working, Anushka, Rojesh, Sanjit, Salina, Suyesha from the BEAD and AF team and other members. Thank you very much for all the support to get this thing going. Ujay, Shakya and the Outreach Nepal team, who has been the comms partner for this event. Suhan and the ISS team, who has been continuously our event management partner, and the team at the Marriott. And for friends in the media, there is a media support desk where you can inquire for the press release and the material from here. Thank you very much once again for joining, and please just join us for high tea and continue the conversations. Thank you.